97% of the people who click on this video will forget every word of it by Thursday. They'll nod along, feel something stir in their chest for about 20 minutes, and then slide right back into the exact same routine they were living yesterday, and the day before that, and the year before that. You are not one of the 97. Something in you already knows that, or you wouldn't still be listening right now instead of scrolling to the next thing. Good. Hold on to that instinct, because I'm not here to hype you up for 20 minutes and then disappear the way motivation always does. Motivation is a match. It flares up bright and hot, and it's gone by dinner time. What I'm handing you in the next 30 minutes isn't a match. It's a different kind of fuel entirely. The kind that doesn't need applause to keep burning. The kind that still works on a gray Tuesday morning when nobody is watching, nothing exciting is happening, and the alarm goes off anyway, same as always. Maybe right now, you are further behind than you thought you'd be at this stage of your life. Maybe you pictured a different version of today, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, back when you were certain you'd have it figured out by now. Perhaps you've built yourself a comfortable little story about why things haven't lined up. The economy, your boss, the family you were born into, the people who caught the lucky break that somehow skipped right past you. Maybe you've spent months or years waiting to feel ready before you start, waiting for some morning when the fire just shows up fully lit on its own, no effort required. And maybe, somewhere quiet in the back of your mind, you already suspect that morning isn't coming. Not because you don't deserve it, not because you're broken or behind in some permanent way, but because it was never designed to arrive that way for anybody. Not once. Not for a single person who has ever built a life worth having. Maybe you've caught yourself checking the clock more than you check your progress. Maybe you've started more things this year than you've finished, and somewhere along the way finishing quietly stopped being the expectation. Perhaps you tell yourself you'll start Monday, and Monday has become a word you use to buy yourself 5 more days of comfortable drifting. Maybe you've noticed that the version of you from a year ago would be disappointed. Not angry, just quietly disappointed, if they could see the excuses you've gotten comfortable making. Maybe you've caught yourself scrolling through someone else's life late at night, wondering how they seem to have it together, without ever once considering that they were sitting exactly where you're sitting now at some point, before they finally decided to stop drifting. None of that makes you weak. It makes you human, and it makes you exactly like almost everyone who has ever sat where you're sitting right now, at the beginning of a change they haven't made yet. The only difference between the people who stay there for another decade and the people who don't is what they're about to learn in the next 25 minutes, and whether they actually use it once they hear it, or whether they let it become just one more thing they meant to do something with. Here is the first truth you need to plant firmly in your mind, because everything else builds on top of it. Life does not owe you a season. Spring shows up whenever spring decides it's ready, not a day sooner because you asked nicely. Winter arrives whether your coat is ready or not, whether your finances are ready or not, whether your heart is ready or not. Nobody gets a vote on the weather. That part was decided long before you got here, and it'll keep getting decided long after, completely without your input. But here's the part that actually matters. The part that changes the entire equation. You get every single vote on what you do while you're standing in that weather. That's the whole game. Not what happens to you. What you do about what happens to you. Picture 2 people standing in the exact same storm, soaked by the exact same rain. One of them spends the whole storm shaking a fist at the sky, cursing his luck, cataloging every reason this shouldn't be happening to him. The other one turns around and starts building something, right there in the wet and the wind, something that might actually survive the next storm that comes, because another one is always coming. Same rain, same cold. 2 completely different outcomes, and the only variable that changed was the person, not the weather. So here is the first discipline, and I want you to actually hear this one, because it sounds too plain and too obvious for most people to bother taking seriously. You have to become someone who plants before there's any proof the seed is going to grow. Think about a farmer standing over an empty field in March. He doesn't stand there demanding to see the corn before he agrees to plant it. That's not how it works, and he knows it. He plants in faith that a process older than he is will do what it has always done, and then he shows up every single day afterward to do the unglamorous, repetitive, invisible work of tending something that isn't showing him anything yet. Weeks of nothing, no stalks breaking the surface, no proof whatsoever that any of it is working. And if he quit in April because the field looked exactly the same as the day he planted it, he was never really a farmer at all. He was just a man standing in dirt waiting to be impressed before he'd commit to the work. Your goals operate on the exact same terms. The gym doesn't show up on your body in week 1 or week 3, sometimes not even week 8. The book doesn't finish itself somewhere in the first chapter. The business doesn't turn a profit before it first turns into a habit, repeated so many times it stops feeling optional. If you need to see the harvest before you're willing to work the field, you will quit every field you ever step into, one after another, for the rest of your life, always blaming the field and never once looking at the farmer. So here's your action for this one, and I mean this literally, not as a metaphor. Pick the one thing you've been waiting to feel ready for, and do 15 minutes of it today, with zero evidence yet that it's working. 15 minutes. That's the seed going into the ground, and the ground doesn't care whether you feel ready. It only cares whether you showed up. Here's the second thing, and Jim Rohn spent a good portion of his career trying to hammer this idea into rooms full of people who didn't want to hear it. Discipline weighs ounces. Regret weighs tons. Sit with that comparison for a second. A little discipline right now, today, costs you almost nothing. 15 minutes, an earlier alarm. Saying no to something easy so you can say yes to something that matters. It's light. It barely registers as a sacrifice while you're doing it. But regret, the kind that shows up 10 years down the line when you're looking back at a decade, you cannot get back under any circumstances. That thing is heavy in a way nothing in the present moment can prepare you for. Here's the part almost nobody tells you plainly enough. People rarely destroy their lives with one dramatic decision. That's not how ruin usually happens. It happens one small, quiet, seemingly harmless skip at a time. Skip the workout. Just this once, you tell yourself, and it sounds so reasonable in the moment. Skip the savings. Just this month, you'll catch up later. Skip the hard conversation. Just for now, there'll be a better time. None of those individual skips feel like anything at all. That's exactly what makes them dangerous. A single feather doesn't feel heavy either, not one feather. But you've been carrying 10,000 of them for 10 years without noticing. And one day you try to stand up and you can't figure out why it's suddenly so hard. Think about it honestly for a second. Nobody wakes up one morning 50 pounds heavier than they wanted to be. It happens one skipped walk, one extra plate, one "I'll start Monday" at a time, stretched out over years until the mirror finally forces the conversation nobody wanted to have. Nobody wakes up one morning drowning in debt out of nowhere. It happens one small purchase justified in the moment, one skipped contribution to savings, one "I deserve this" at a time, until the number finally gets too big to ignore any longer. The debt was never the disaster. The debt was just the bill finally arriving for 1,000 tiny decisions that felt free in the moment they were made. So the action here is simple. And I actually want you to do this one, not just nod along and keep scrolling past it the way you've scrolled past every other piece of advice this year. Tonight, write down one small discipline you've been skipping just this once for weeks, maybe months, maybe longer than you'd like to admit out loud. And tomorrow morning, you do it. Not because you suddenly feel like it. Feeling like it was never the requirement, and it never will be. Not for you. Not for anyone who has ever actually built something worth having. Here's a third idea, one that gets quoted constantly and applied by almost nobody. And it's this: you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not the 5 people you admire quietly from a distance on your phone. The 5 people whose actual energy, actual conversations, and actual daily habits sit closest to your real life. If those 5 people complain more than they build, more than they create, more than they take responsibility, you will start complaining more than you build too. And here's the part that should genuinely concern you. You probably already have, without ever noticing it happen because it never happens all at once in one dramatic conversation. It happens the slow way a room fills up with smoke. Nobody can point to the exact cigarette that finally made the air hard to breathe. It's cumulative, quiet, and completely invisible while it's happening to you. So ask yourself something honest. Right now, no audience watching. If you became the exact average of the people closest to you, is that a person you'd actually choose to be? For some of you, the answer is yes. And if that's true for you, that's a genuine gift. Hold on to those people tightly and thank them while you still can. But for a lot of you listening right now, the honest answer sits somewhere uncomfortable, and you already knew that before I said it. I'm not telling you to dramatically cut people out of your life tonight. That's not the action, and it's not usually necessary. The action is smaller and quieter than that. Find one person, just one, who is further along in discipline than you are in whatever area you're trying to grow, and spend 15 minutes this week in their orbit. A conversation, a video of theirs, a book they wrote, a room they happen to be standing in. Borrow their standard for a little while the way you'd borrow a tool you don't own yet. Here's something worth noticing. Put an average runner in a training group full of people faster than they are, and within a season their times drop, almost without them consciously trying, simply because the standard around them quietly shifted what felt normal. Put that same runner in a group that treats a slow jog as an achievement, and their times will settle right down to match the room, just as quietly, just as automatically. Nobody announces it happening either way. It just happens the way water finds its own level without needing permission. Standards are contagious. So is drift. The only real choice left is which one you're going to keep catching day after day, room after room. Here's a fourth idea, and Rohn built the better part of his entire philosophy around this single thought. So give it your full attention. Your life does not get better by chance. It gets better by change. Not circumstances rearranging themselves conveniently around you while you wait. You changing on purpose, starting now. Most people spend years, sometimes entire decades, hoping the outside world will shift in their favor eventually. A new boss who finally sees their potential. A better economy that finally cooperates. A stroke of luck that finally lands on their doorstep. And in all that hoping, they leave the one variable they actually control completely untouched, which is themselves. If you genuinely want more out of your life, you don't need more luck to show up at your door. You need more of you to show up, a sharper version, a more disciplined version, a version who actually reads the book instead of scrolling past the recommendation for the fourth time, who shows up 15 minutes early instead of exactly on time, who finishes the project instead of getting it to 90% and quietly moving on to something new and shiny. Here's something strange but true. The world has a peculiar habit of rearranging itself around a person who has genuinely changed. Opportunities start looking different, start looking possible, once you're different enough to actually notice them, or different enough to finally deserve them, or simply ready enough to be standing there when they show up instead of somewhere else entirely. So the action here is this. Pick one skill, just one, that the next version of you would already have fully mastered, and commit 15 minutes to it today. Not a perfect result. Not a completely new life by the time you go to bed tonight. 15 minutes, moving you one step closer to becoming the person who actually deserves the life you keep asking the universe to hand you. There's a fifth idea, and it might be the most practically important one of all, because it's the exact line that separates people who talk endlessly about their goals from people who actually reach them. A goal without a written plan is just a wish wearing a nicer outfit. It feels like ambition. It sounds like ambition when you say it out loud at a dinner table and everyone nods approvingly. But if it's not written down anywhere, if it doesn't have an actual date attached to it, If you couldn't hand it to a complete stranger on a piece of paper and have them understand exactly what you're chasing and by when, then it isn't a goal at all. It's a daydream you've dressed up in more convincing language. Rohn used to point out something almost uncomfortably simple. The exact same 24 hours get handed out to the millionaire and to the man who can't cover his rent this month. The same 24 hours, no more, no less, for either one of them. What separates the two of them was never the hours themselves. It was what each of them decided, in advance, on paper, to build with those hours, instead of hoping the day would somehow organize itself around good intentions. So here's your action, and I actually want you to pause this video for 30 seconds and do it right where you're sitting. Take out something to write on, right now if you possibly can. Write down one goal with an actual date attached to it. Not get in better shape, floating vaguely in the air somewhere. 10 pounds down by the 1st of September. Not read more books this year. 12 books by December 31st, 2 chapters every single day without exception. Specific, dated, real enough to be broken and therefore real enough to be kept. Notice the difference between those two versions of the same goal. One of them can be checked on August 31st and either kept or broken. The other one can drift comfortably forever, always technically still true, never quite arriving, never quite failing either, because it was never specific enough to do either one. That single act, written down and dated in your own handwriting, is what moves something from wish into plan, and a plan has always been the only thing that has ever actually built anything worth having. And here's a 6th idea, shorter than the rest. But it ties everything above it together like a knot pulling tight. Success was never one enormous decision made on one dramatic Tuesday afternoon. It is a small handful of boring, unremarkable disciplines, repeated every single day, quietly compounding until they eventually produce something that looks impossible from the outside looking in. Nobody watching from a distance ever sees the 15 minutes. Nobody sees the early mornings or the countless nights you said no to something easy and comfortable in favor of something that actually mattered. They only ever see the harvest years later, and they call it luck or talent or a lucky break they somehow missed out on, because the daily repetition that actually built it was completely invisible to them the entire time. It won't be invisible to you, though. You will know exactly what you did on the days nobody else was watching. That's the entire secret. And here's the strange part. It was never actually hidden from anyone. It was simply too plain, too repetitive, and too unglamorous for most people to bother picking up and using consistently. Here's a 7th idea, and it might be the quietest one of all, easy to miss, but it may end up being the one that changes your life the most over a long enough stretch of time. Work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Rohn used to point out that if you work hard at your job, you can make a living. And that's true, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. But if you work hard on yourself, you can make a fortune. Or at the very least, you can make a life you actually recognize as your own when you look back at it. Most people spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week sharpening skills that belong entirely to someone else's company, and exactly 0 hours sharpening the one asset they'll be carrying with them into every single room they ever walk into for the rest of their life, which is themselves. Ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you deliberately learned something that had nothing to do with keeping your current job safe? When was the last time you read something that stretched you instead of something that simply passed the time? Formal education can make you a living, and there's real value in that. Nobody's arguing otherwise. But self-education, the kind you choose for yourself, on your own time, driven by your own hunger to grow, is what tends to make people wealthy in every sense of that word. Not just financially, but in confidence and capability, in the sense that they are becoming someone genuinely worth becoming. So here's the action for this one. Spend 15 minutes today learning something that has nothing to do with staying safe at your job, and everything to do with becoming a sharper, more capable version of yourself. A book, an audio lesson, a skill you've been circling for months without ever committing. 15 minutes invested in the one asset you'll never lose, never get laid off from, and never have to hand back when you walk out the door. I want to step away from teaching for a moment and be honest with you, because I think you've earned that after everything we've just walked through together. I've laid out all of this like a man who has it completely figured out, and the truth is, nobody standing behind these words has it all figured out. Not fully, not permanently. I have missed mornings I promised myself, with total sincerity, that I wouldn't miss. I have let small regrets pile up quietly, feather by feather, the same as anyone listening to this right now. I have stood in seasons I never asked for, and on plenty of days, cursed the sky instead of doing the harder work of building shelter. I have worked harder on protecting my job some weeks than I have on becoming a better version of myself, and I've caught myself doing it and kept doing it anyway, more than once. That's not a confession meant to let either of us off the hook. It's actually the opposite of that. It's proof that none of what we've talked about requires you to be some finished, fully disciplined person before you're allowed to begin. It only requires you to be exactly the unfinished, imperfect person you already are, right now, in this moment, willing to plant one seed today with zero proof it'll grow, willing to skip one fewer skip than you did yesterday, willing to borrow a better standard from someone a little further along than you, willing to change one small, specific thing about yourself instead of waiting patiently for the entire world to change first on your behalf. The season doesn't ask your permission before it arrives. It never has, and it never will. But starting today, right now, you get to decide exactly what you build while you're standing in it. Here's the line I want you to actually carry with you. The one thing that matters most if you forget every other sentence from the last 30 minutes. You will not rise to the level of your goals. You will fall to the level of your daily disciplines. Say that back to yourself tonight, quietly, before you fall asleep. You will not rise to the level of your goals. You will fall to the level of your daily disciplines. That's the entire philosophy, distilled down into one sentence. And it was always simple enough to fit into one sentence. That's precisely why so many people walk right past it their entire lives, searching for something more complicated to hide behind instead. So here's the challenge, and it isn't for someday. It isn't for next Monday. It's for the next 24 hours, starting the very moment this video ends and your screen goes dark. Pick one single seed from everything you just heard, one discipline you've been quietly skipping. One small shift in the people you spend your time closest to. One goal you finally write down with an actual date attached to it in your own handwriting. One 15 minutes spent learning instead of scrolling. It doesn't matter which one you choose. What matters is that you actually choose one, instead of quietly agreeing with all 7 and acting on none of them, which is exactly what most people watching this will do, and exactly why most people are still standing in the same field next year that they're standing in tonight. Do it before you go to sleep tonight, not next week, not once you finally feel ready. Tonight. 15 minutes is genuinely all it takes to prove to yourself once and for all that you're one of the people who actually does the thing, instead of one of the people who just watches other people talk about doing it over and over, video after video, year after year, always meaning to, never quite starting. And before you go, one more small thing, and I mean it. Down in the comments, I want you to write exactly one word. Just one. The single word that represents the discipline you're committing to, starting tonight. Right now, before you close this video. Not a paragraph explaining yourself. Not a long story about your circumstances. One word. Because a word you've actually typed out, in public, with your name attached to it, is a lot harder to quietly walk away from 3 days from now than a private thought you kept safely inside your own head where nobody could hold you to it. The season is already moving, whether you write that word or not. It was moving before you clicked on this video, and it'll keep moving long after you close it. The only question left standing is whether you're finally ready to move along with it, starting tonight, or whether you're going to let this be one more video you forgot by Thursday.